Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. What's up? What's up? Today we're talking about living with your parents. So, I am Corel Pinder if this is the first time you're tuning in, and this is the unconventional path. And today I'm talking about the fact that I live with my parents and I am in my late 30s. So, some of you may be wondering, like, why do you live with your parents exactly if you're in your late 30s? So I'm going to tell you how I ended up living with my parents at this age. And then I'm going to give you some pros and some cons about living with your parents as an adult. So let me first say I'm from the Bahamas. So in the Caribbean, it's not that weird for adults to live with their parents. They're kind of like old school and traditional. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people are old school and traditional, where it's kind of known that you live with your parents until you get married. I remember when I was in grad school in North Carolina and I was telling my friends that the guy I was dating was living at home, and they were like, oh my gosh, is that not a turn off? And I was just like, no, like people in the Bahamas live at home until they're married. So the fact that we were in our 20s living at home, it just wasn't a big deal. We have become a lot more modern, so there are a lot more of people my age that have decided to get apartments or condos or even houses before they were married, just because people tend to get married later. You know, back in the day, people got married early 20s, and so it made sense that you lived with your parents until you got married. Now that a lot of people are getting married, probably more so late 20s, early 30s, some people decide to get their own place. However, I didn't. So why? So when I was about all through my 20s, I thought I was gonna get married early. So I'm just like kind of waiting for, like, I don't need to move out now because I'm about to get married. So when I realized like that's not happening anytime soon, around the same time that I realized like getting married probably wasn't gonna happen in my 20s, was the same time that I got this job opportunity in Nassau, which is the capital of the Bahamas. A little geography for you. So I was going to move out of my parents' house because I was about to live on my own. I was 29, and for me, I was super excited. I was like, all right, 30 did not meet me in my parents' house. Maybe I did not move out because I was getting married, but now I live on my own. So I got a really nice condo in the capital. I had a really nice job, but a year later, that job was no more. And so I had to figure out, like, what was I gonna do? So I was really praying about what God wanted me to do, what was the next steps, and I think then made up in my mind that I was gonna go to LA. And I knew I wasn't gonna go to LA for a while, so I had to save up some money, and I no longer could afford the condo that I was living in. So there was a friend that I went to high school with who had a 2-bedroom, and I told her, like, it's only gonna be a few months before I go to LA because I just needed to save up a lot of money before I went. And so she had an extra bedroom, so I had a roommate for a few months before I went to LA. And then when I went to LA, I stayed with a family friend on a couch. And so I lived on a couch for the few months when I was in LA, and that was fine because apparently, like, you haven't really had the LA experience until you lived on a couch. And so in my mind, for me, I was thinking, like, I am going to go home and then I'm gonna save up enough money so I can do some more courses, and then I'm gonna fly back, and then I'm gonna move back to LA. I don't know if I'm gonna go back on a couch, it doesn't matter. But I'm only gonna go home for the summer of 2016. Friends, it is 2022. But when I went home for the summer in 2016, I felt like God was telling me, like, I don't want you to go back. And so I was like, all right, like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing here, but I'm going to be obedient and stay. And so it just made sense to be by my parents. So some of you may be saying, like, that was like 6 years ago. There was still time to move. And there was, as you can tell, if this is your first episode, or even if, you know, you watch more episodes, you know that a lot of the decisions that I make are by the leading of the Holy Spirit. And I did not feel that I got a yes to, like, move somewhere different or to move into another house. Unfortunately, my brother passed away in 2019. He owned a condo. And so the conversation did come up at that time, like, did I want to move into the condo? But I was, like, not on board with that. I was just like, let's take our time, let's renovate his apartment, and then let's use it as a source of income, which we've created into an Airbnb so that it's a source of income for the entire family. I just didn't feel in a position to move in. I just didn't think that that was what God was leading me to do. So I live with my parents. So I think there are pros and cons of living at home. I am going to give you some of the pros first. So the pros of living with your parents. So number one, it's not really that big of a deal in the Caribbean. Like, it's like, I think it's kind of accepted. It's not really like, you don't get a lot of side eyes. Like, if I have conversations with my friends in America that are my age, it's like almost none of them live at home. But when you're from the Caribbean, when you're from the Bahamas, it's like I said, there are more people my age that live on their own or have their own now, but it's still kind of okay. So it's not really that big of a deal. So you don't feel that much societal pressure of, oh my gosh, you live at home. Because I mean, I have married friends who live at home. It's not my cup of tea, but I think that you go through seasons and life gets lifey. And for some reason, sometimes there's a season where you have to live with your parents. And I'm like, if they have enough humility to decide that this is what's best for the season for us and live with their parents, who am I to, you know, beat myself up because I'm single and I live with my parents. So it's not that frowned upon in the Caribbean, so the societal pressure isn't there like that. Number 2, I get to save a lot. I do pay my parents rent. In case you're like, you're 37, you don't have any responsibilities. No, I pay my parents rent so that I can, you know, develop and be used to when I do go on my own of what it means to pay bills and make allocations for certain things. So I do pay rent, but my rent is not, you know, what it would be like when I lived in my condo, or even when it's a little closer to what it was when I shared a space with someone. And so I think that, you know, that's a good practice of, you know, you're still paying rent, you're still contributing to the home, but I do get to save a whole lot, because if I had a condo of my own, it would be totally different. And so the savings have been a really great thing. The third thing about me living with my parents is my parents are super supportive. I am an entrepreneur. I work for myself. I'm pursuing a career in filmmaking, and even though my parents are from the Caribbean, they're not old school to be like, you doing what? Like, they give me room to explore. Like, I have breakdowns on myself. Like, I have breakdowns, like, it's a slow season when it comes, like, I'm freaking out, and they're just like, it's okay, you're not gonna starve. Like, we're here, we got you. Like, they understand. They're not like, oh, you're home today, or like, they just really understand the dynamics, and they give me the support to explore this creative industry, as unconventional as it is. And so I think that's really dope, and I really appreciate them for that. So that's number 3, the fact that my parents are super supportive. Number 4 pro is that I have experienced losing a close family member. And so I think you always realize that, you know, at some point your parents are going to pass away. But I think that when you have a close member of your family, your immediate family, that passes, it makes death seem a lot more real. And so I am super intentional about continuing the bond and forming the bond with my parents and spending time with them. And I think I can be more intentional about it because I live here. The kind of personality I have, if I didn't live here, I probably wouldn't talk to my parents every day. I can get very caught up in my work habits and my routine and everything that I'm doing. So living in the house allows me to be a lot more intentional about spending time with them and cherishing those memories and making those memories. And number 5, the final pro about living at home that I feel, you know, is a good thing, is that I still have that covering. I am very traditional, old school. I do look forward to my husband being my protector, my provider, the priest of our home, and the covering. So living on my own, I'm always gonna have my father's covering until he hands me over in marriage. But to know that when I come home at night, that I'm coming home at night to a covering. When I go out, I'm leaving from under a covering. That gives me a sense of security and warmth to know that I have that. So those are the pros about, you know, living home. So some of the cons. Despite it being okay in the Caribbean, I consistently fight with feeling like a failure. Like, legit. Like, I have those voices in my head where you're like, you're 37, what if people are not from the Caribbean or cultures where living with your parents are the norm? Maybe you're in the comments saying, how dare you live at home and you're 37. So I have that talk, like that negative self-talk sometimes. I remember in 2020, I was representing a brand and we had to do lives with our mothers, and I had like a breakdown during the live because I was sharing that I feel like a failure because I'm in my 30s and I live at home. And I just feel like you should just have your own by then. So that's definitely a con of fighting that negative self-talk, that you should be living on your own just because just because it's the conventional path. It's what most people expect, and that this unconventional path is just kind of crazy. So the second thing is, that's a con, is that you take on childlike behaviors. I remember having this acquaintance tell me that they were moving, like they didn't have to move because they were doing a lot online since COVID, and they were like, I want to move because when I'm in my house, I don't get to do anything because my mom is so used to catering to me as a child. And so I don't know if anybody ever lived home and you kind of go back into that childlike, whether you're like married and you live on your own or you have your own condo or anything, sometimes you go back into that behavior like a child because it's like, mom's gonna clean, mom's gonna cook, mom's gonna do the laundry, so you kind of don't take as much of initiative to do those things because there's someone in the house doing it. And so for me, I noticed that if I lived on my own, I would do laundry all the time, but I don't because my mom does it. If I lived on my own, then I would cook way more often. And just recently, within the last few months, I started like, you know, cooking more and just being more intentional about it because you're just so used to taking on that childlike behavior. And so it's like conditioning yourself and being, you know, assertive of the fact that I need to take on certain responsibilities and not just because I'm in the home, like flow into that child. So that's a con, like you just subconsciously flow into that childlike behavior, which is at 37, it's like, bruh, like no, you don't want to be doing that. Okay, so the third con about living with your parents is that I love to entertain, and my parents, like I said, they're super supportive, but they allow me to entertain in their home. Like they allow me to entertain at our pool and stuff like that. But I think I would entertain a lot more if I had my own place because at the end of the day, it is their home. And so I don't want to ever feel like, oh, you're intruding or you have people in their spot or whatever. So I think I would entertain more if I had my own spot, and like it's just your, you know, your own space, which brings me to the final one, which is me time. Like I like me time. I am an extrovert, as you can see. My energy is just like but I have my moments, I guess because I'm a writer, where I don't want to be bothered. And I believe that the Lord did not allow me to stay on my own from 29 until 37 because marriage would be a lot harder, because I'm forced to, like, if my mom comes in the room like, oh, you want to have a conversation? Okay, cool, let's have a conversation. Because in marriage, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to be like, I don't want to have a conversation with you. I'm just doing me time. I'm sure when you're married, you have those moments, you have those times for me time. But like, I get so into me time that I'm irritated when someone interrupts me, and that's not a good fostering for a relationship. So I feel like having me time as much as I want, I can't have it, so that's a con, but I do realize why God had me in this kind of environment. So those are some of the pros and some of the cons. You can let me know in the comments if you have any other pros, any other cons. Let me know if you're related to this message, and let me know what more you want to hear about when it comes to family, those relationships. And thank you once again for tuning in. Can't wait to see you next week.